Welcome back to Battleground Blitz Tactics. This is a series that gives an in-depth breakdown of every battleground in the new Battleground Blitz mode and will give you strategies and tips that'll help you win your games more often. Today, we're going to be covering how to win in Capture the Flag, and while I had some different ideas for how I could take this episode, I decided to let you, the viewer, have the final say. 60% of you voted that I split up the Capture the Flag maps into a two-part mini-series. So today we'll be looking at Capture the Flag in general along with a breakdown of Warsong Gulch, and then tomorrow at this same time, I'll have a shorter episode where we'll only be looking at the Twin Peaks map breakdown. I'm your Overlord Moon, and let's jump in to the Battleground Blitz Tactics. Kicking off the Capture the Flag mini-series, we're going to be taking a look at Warsong Gulch. It is the standard classic battleground that you think of when you think of battlegrounds in World of Warcraft. It is a very straightforward Capture the Flag map where the first team to reach 3 captures wins the game. Taking a look at the changes in Battleground Blitz specifically, there's not a whole lot going on, but there are a few changes that you should be mindful of. The first is that the game length has been shortened down to 12 minutes, so at the end of 12 minutes, if no team has reached 3 captures, the team with the most captures will instead win the game, or if both teams are at 0 captures by then, the game will end in a draw. Additionally, the Focused Assault debuff, which is the debuff that is applied to the flag carrier, we'll go a little bit more into this in a bit, but it has been changed to where it applies faster, and it starts applying after 30 seconds. And the last change, which is a brand new change from the Battleground Blitz mode, is the Empowered Carrier buff that only applies in games without a tank to make the flag carrier a little bit more powerful, but we'll go over that shortly. So let's take a look at Focused Assault. So Focused Assault is a debuff that the flag carrier receives. In Battleground Blitz, it is after both teams have picked up the flag for 30 seconds, and both flag carriers will receive this debuff at the same time. It is a stacking debuff that will apply after every 15 seconds that will increase the damage taken, reduce the healing received, and at 5+ stacks, it becomes a brand new debuff called Brutal Assault, where it will slow the movement speed of the flag carrier. Historically, this would only stack up to 15 stacks in the normal Battleground mode, and I believe in Rated Battlegrounds too. But in Battleground Blitz, to my knowledge, I have seen this infinitely stack, and I have seen flag carriers with as high as 19 stacks. The next thing we're going to be taking a look at is the Empowered Carrier buff. This is only applicable to games without a tank in it. We're going to go over this a little bit later, but if you are a tank, you are basically forced to carry the flag, because the flag carriers will not receive this buff if there is a tank present in the game. So in non-tank games, the flag carrier will receive a 10% increase to their maximum health, a 30% increase to their movement speed, and a 25% damage reduction for 4 seconds when they're in a stun, as most stuns in the game are 5 to 6 seconds at max off of the initial diminishing return. This is very powerful for being able to live when you have low stacks and you're trying to get the flag back to your base. So unlike Arathi Basin, where the best strategy depended on your comp, and unlike Eye of the Storm, where the best strategy depended on what your team was actively doing, in Capture the Flag, the best strategy can vary dependent on the enemy team composition. So the primary strategy we're going to go over in the most detail, since this is a solo duo game mode, you can't really coordinate what everybody on the team is doing, is going to be the 2 teams that are splitting into an offense and a defensive team. That's why I've split down in the roles list below the offense and defense into their own separate DPS categories. But it is also possible for the whole team to escort the flag carrier and move as one unit at the same time. It's just a little bit more difficult to pull off, and we'll go over circumstances like that in a bit. But in this mode, winning Capture the Flag, there are 4 main roles. There's the tank, the healer, the offensive DPS, and the defensive DPS. If you've been keeping up with the series, you know this is the part where I'm like, but Moon, how do I know if I'm an offensive or a defensive DPS? No need to fret, I've got you covered. The chart is right here. I'm going to take a quick moment to briefly cover what constitutes a good offensive DPS versus a defensive DPS. So good characteristics of an offensive DPS would first and foremost be burst damage. Are you able to do a large amount of damage to the enemy flag carrier in a short amount of time so that you can secure the kill and return the flag? The next characteristic I'd be looking at for a good offensive DPS is good mobility to where they can keep up with the enemy flag carrier. While it is true that the longer the enemy flag carrier has the flag, that they will be receiving a stacking debuff that will significantly slow their movement speed, a lot of flag carriers will have movement abilities and will try to kite you around their base to stall for long enough to where they'll be able to capture the flag. So being able to have good mobility to keep up with the enemy flag carrier is also going to be another thing that I'm looking at. Is, do you have a Mortal Strike ability? There are classes such as Warrior, for instance, that have a very powerful Mortal Strike, and that healing reduction paired with the healing reduction that the flag carrier receives, makes it near impossible for the enemy healers to keep their flag carrier alive. Again, another characteristic that makes a powerful offensive DPS. And then on the defensive DPS side, you're probably wondering, it's like, why do you have Death Knight in the defense category? Wouldn't they be a really good offensive DPS because they can grip the flag carrier back? And while that is true, certain classes like Death Knights have some of the most powerful slows in the game with Chains of Ice, with these grips that can help peel for their own flag carrier and allow them to create distance between the enemy team and themselves. Same thing with mages and warlocks is that they have very good zone control. So I'm looking at classes that have very good AoE zone control. I'm looking at classes that have really good slows, really good utility, really good peel capabilities for their flag carrier that would justify them being a good enough defensive DPS. There are some classes like Warrior that can play both good offense and defense because they have abilities such as Hamstring that are very powerful slows. But for those of you who may not know what constitutes good offense versus good defense, I hope these are good enough characteristics that can help you make a judgment on what you should be doing in Capture the Flag. So regarding knowing your role and what is your role, for my tank players out there, you are the flag carrier. If you are not carrying the flag, you are wrong. I have had tanks before that have ran into the middle and they thought, oh, you know, I'm just going to be this really disruptive force that's just going to keep disrupting people in the middle and I'm going to be this guy that's impossible to kill. You are wrong, because the empowered carrier buff is not applied to your teammates. So if your teammate goes to get the flag and the enemy tank goes to get the flag, you are putting your whole team at a disadvantage, because tanks, as a specialization in general, have very good defensive abilities, very good damage reduction, and I'll talk a little bit later on about how damage reduction is absolutely key in this game mode. Some tanks have okay enough mobility, but mobility isn't necessarily as important as being able to live damage and have good damage reduction in this game mode. But the main point that I'm trying to drive home is that the best thing you can do for your team is to carry the flag. When you are carrying the flag, it's also important that you stay in range of your healers. I know that it can be very scary when you're trying to take the flag from the enemy base to your base and you're taking damage and you're getting slowed and you're getting stunned. But it's also important at the same time to stay in range of your healers, because if you line of sight your healers, they are not able to heal you. And all it takes is one good druid or one good rogue to peel away from the pack long enough to catch you without a healer, and just like that you can throw the game for your team. So even in situations where you may think like, oh, it's better to run away here while your healer's getting death gripped over and over by a Death Knight, sometimes it's worth taking a little bit of extra damage at the time to ensure that you can still be healed and still have really good healing cooldowns used on you, such as damage reduction. The last thing that you're going to be doing is you're going to be using your damage reduction cooldowns to stay alive. In Capture the Flag mode, due to the changes of the Brutal Assault and Focused Assault debuff, and given how quickly things will ramp up, my personal prediction is that tanks that have better damage mitigation cooldowns, such as Guardian Druids, such as Vengeance Demon Hunters, will be able to win out over other tanks such as Protection Paladin or tanks such as Brewmaster Monk. While I used to personally run a Brewmaster Monk tank in Rated Battlegrounds because we were able to kite for long enough and make things work, tanks such as Brewmaster simply are not as effective in this mode because the Focused Assault debuff ramps up so fast. And so to my tank friends, the team's success largely depends on how well you play. This isn't something you get to do a whole lot on every map, but in Capture the Flag, everything's centered around you. So to my healer friends out there, you're going to be having a lot of responsibilities going on at the same time. The primary one that you've got is going to be supporting the team fight and your flag carrier. Realistically, the only team fight that should be happening is the initial one at the beginning, where both tanks are trying to skirt by and get the flags for their team. But dependent on the enemy team composition, such as if the enemy team has a rogue or a marksman hunter that you don't have clear sight of, one of you healers may need to peel off and escort your flag carrier to get the flag. The other thing that you're going to be doing is peeling for your flag carrier. If you are a healer with a large amount of utility, such as like a restoration shaman or a restoration druid, you're going to want to be using that utility to keep people off of your flag carrier. The less damage they take, the less damage you have to heal. You're also going to be doing everything you can to stay in range of your flag carrier. As a healer main myself, I know from experience that everybody and their brother will try to train you, will try to crowd control you, will try to do anything to keep you off of your flag carrier, and it can be the most frustrating thing in your world when you get barely pulled outside of range and can no longer heal your flag carrier. So, to counteract this, we're going to be playing close to max range of our flag carrier, but we're actually going to be wanting to run in front of him, so that in the ability that our flag carrier has a mobility cooldown, they can catch up to us without having to feel super stressed or pressured like they are going to outrange us. So just as it is important for your tank or whoever your flag carrier is to stay in line of sight of you and to stay in range of you, it is equally as important to you that you're doing your part to stay in range of them. We're going to be keeping our teammates aggressive. It is very possible that the healers may need to split up into an offensive healer and a defensive healer. We'll talk about what constitutes that in a little bit. But ensuring that you are quickly dispelling your teammates, quickly dispelling your flag carrier if they have like a magic debuff on them or a lot of magical stuns or crowd control on them, that you're getting that off as quickly as possible. Or if you're the offensive healer, that you're dispelling your highest damage dealers, putting as much pressure on the enemy flag carrier as you can, just doing your part to make sure that your teammates can make things happen. Again, because I'm a healer, you're really not going to hear this from anywhere else, but I do want to go over what constitutes a good offensive healer versus what constitutes a good defensive healer. The main thing is damage reduction versus disruption. A really good defensive healer would be one that ideally has a damage reduction cooldown built in to where they can support their flag carrier should they begin taking a lot of damage. The two examples that come to my mind are going to be Holy Paladin and Discipline Priest. For Discipline Priest, do you remember when I said that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure? An ounce of damage reduction is worth like 50 pounds of healing. So pain suppression being a 40% damage reduction cooldown is going to be absolutely insane for keeping your flag carrier alive. Same thing when it comes to Holy Paladin and Blessing of Sacrifice, or if you notice that there's a lot of physical damage coming in, such as like a monk or a warrior, if you throw a Blessing of Protection on your flag carrier, you'd be completely fine. When it comes to offensive healers, the things that I can think of are going to be Restoration Druids and Restoration Shamans, just because both of those healers have a ton of utility to keep their team aggressive and to disrupt the enemy team as well. Specifically when it comes to cycloning the enemy healers, when it comes to rooting and wind shearing enemy healers. There are some healers that can kind of play either or, like when it comes to Mistweaver, depending on if you're casted Mistweaver or Fist Weaving, you could go either which way, but just wanted to briefly go over characteristics that make a good offensive healer versus a good defensive healer. I'm not saying that you should only be playing offensive or defensive based off of those characteristics, because sometimes, you know, both of your healers have to double up to protect your flag carrier from a large incoming wave, and things can be a bit situational, but I just want to give you that information so you can better your decision making. Next, we're going to go on to the DPS. Starting with the offensive DPS, your role is very straightforward. You're going to be coordinating burst damage on the enemy flag carrier, otherwise known as EFC. You may see that in chat a lot when people say EFC Graveyard, EFC Tunnel. That's who they're referring to. They're referring to the enemy flag carrier. You're going to be using your Mortal Strike effects on the enemy flag carrier. When I say the word Mortal Strike, I do know that Mortal Strike is a warrior cooldown, but it is used commonly as any cooldown from any class that has a healing reduction effect applied whenever it's pressed. And so we're going to be using those on the enemy flag carrier because it's basically a waste if you use it on anybody else. And lastly, we're going to be using our crowd control on the enemy healers. That is how you are going to get your most value, is that when you are attacking the flag carrier, if the enemy healer is in crowd control, that is 0 healing going on the enemy flag carrier, which allows you to get a quicker kill and return the flag for your team. And so I'll see people try to like absolutely kill the enemy healers, and while you can do that, you could try to like pressure them to run out of mana. If you are killing the enemy healers instead of the flag carrier, if both of them are standing next to each other, you're just wasting your time. If anything, I'll actually try and bait melee DPS to come and attack me because it's less time spent that they could be doing damage on my flag carrier. That's your primary responsibilities as offensive DPS. Moving on to the defensive DPS, you're going to be peeling for your own flag carrier with crowd controls and slows. This is because you want the flag carrier to create distance between themselves and the other DPS. I'm going to go ahead and jump down to the third point here, where it's important as defensive DPS that you're using this crowd control, you're using this zone control, you're using these slows, that you're staggering the enemy DPS with crowd control, because it's easier for your healers to keep the flag carrier alive through one person attacking him at a time than, say, 4 people attacking him at the same time. So if you're able to isolate, you're able to break up the enemy team formation to where only 1 or 2 people at max are able to hit your flag carrier, you can defend against a lot of incoming damage by just preventing it from happening in the first place. And the main thing we're doing is stopping that wombo combo that will one-shot our flag carrier and cause us to lose the point. Additionally, just like the offensive DPS, you are also going to be focusing your crowd control on the enemy healers if applicable. Sometimes they may send one of their healers to come in and heal the offensive team. keep them alive for a little bit longer to keep the pressure rolling against your team. But if you crowd control the enemy healer, that's 0 healing going out to the enemy team. So as a whole, you DPS, you really don't have a ton of responsibilities. Your responsibilities are straightforward, but your ability to execute those are going to determine whether or not you win or lose the game. Going into the main strategies now, we're going to be talking about the offense and defense versus the full team escort strategy. The split team strategy, I guess I should have just named it that. The split team strategy is better when the enemy team has a team fight composition, because being able to split them up and put pressure on multiple sides of the map at the same time can help chip away at what makes the enemy team powerful. And then the full team escort would really come into play if the enemy team has multiple solo target threats. So these would be things such as boomkins, these would be things such as rogues, such as marksman hunters, these stealth classes that can sneak past your team and have a high enough burst potential to one-shot the enemy flag carrier by themselves. Again, the immediate thing that comes to mind when I'm thinking of this is Assassination Rogue. They have some of the highest single target burst damage in the game right now. Very scary to go against, and I would not trust my flag carrier to go and grab the flag if I don't have vision on where that rogue is. So sometimes it is better to do a full team escort than it is to play offense and defense. So now that we went over that, let's go ahead and go to the map review. Alright everybody, welcome to the map review segment for Warsong Gulch. So to get started, we'll jump right into it. We've got the Alliance at Silverwing Hold, we've got the Horde at Warsong Lumbermill, but I want to go over a few terms that are directional in nature so that you can get familiar with it when you see in chat specifically referring to where the enemy flag carrier is. We've got GY, which stands for Graveyard, we've got Tunnel, and we've got the Ramp. So Graveyard is going to be right here, and right here for the Alliance. When people refer to the Graveyard as that, they're referring to the enemy flag carriers coming out over this way, or if you're on the Horde, over this way. I think I'll go ahead and swap over to the red pin. A little bit easier to see. Oh yeah, this is 100% easier to see. So this is what they mean by this. It's generally the shortest path to get to your own tunnel, but it's also the most risky. We'll go over that when we do our second one where we talk about carrying the flag, but just getting you familiar with where that is. The tunnel are going to be the tunnels that are just coming straight through. Very straightforward, very simple. But when people refer to ramp, they actually refer to this area over here. That is the ramp to the left of where your tunnel actually is. Alright, so now that we got that out of the way, let's go ahead and get a game simulated here. So realistically, what will happen is that there's always going to be a team fight in the middle. Sometimes there's not, sometimes both teams opt to go for an escort, but for the most time you can guarantee that a team fight will break out somewhere around this vicinity. And then what you'll see sometimes is you'll see a couple DPS peel off to the berserking buffs, which will be in these little huts over here to the immediate left of your base. What they do is they increase your damage taken, but for the person who picks up the buff, it also increases the damage that they do. So you will see a very high damage DPS, probably like a Ret Paladin or like a Boomkin or something, run over to these huts over here, pick up the Berserker buff, and then go to the team fight from there. So let's talk about the team fight itself. As we mentioned earlier, the team fight can happen realistically anywhere in the middle area. I feel like you would have the most success if you try to bring the team fight closer to where your graveyard is. So let's say that we're Alliance in this simulation right here. If we take the team fight and the team fight, say, starts over here in the middle, we want to drag the Horde back over to here so that in the event that people on our team do go down, or if a healer does go down, it's not as much of a commitment for them to get back into the fight. It's a shorter time. We can potentially get some cheeky kills, say, in this region. Oops, I removed the P in ramp. And swing things in our favor. We're taking more people off of the board. And whenever we do want to go offense, we've got that straight shot either to the ramp or to the tunnel. I see people all the time, what they'll do is they'll try and win the team fight here and then push in and graveyard camp, which can be cool and all, but if the enemy team has a stealth like a Boomkin or a Rogue or a Hunter, they can just sneak out, basically stealth immediately when they spawn, and then your whole team that's trying to spawn camp and farm honor is throwing because there's nobody protecting the flag carrier, and it just takes one successful kill to get your flag carrier down, get the enemy team a cap, etc. So realistically, you don't want to dilly-dally, you just want to try to close out the game as fast as you can. Additionally, if you happen to bring the fight closer to your graveyard, you're also closer to your own leaf, which I will go ahead and use like a yellow pin to go ahead and circle. So the leaf buffs are going to be to your right when you're coming out of your base. And this is going to be really good because this can bring a healer all the way up to full mana. It restores health and mana, but really only your healers want to be touching these buffs because of the mana restoration. It's essentially like if they were to peel out of the fight and drink, but it restores their mana in half the time. It is just so unbelievably good for healers. So being close to that, having the option, again, it's less of a detriment for them to go out of their way than it would be if the team fight was, say, over down here in this area. So let's go ahead and remove the circles, and we'll talk about the offense and defense strategy. So something that's important to note is that both bases have 3 tiers to it. So you've got the first floor, which you'll see over here. Let me go ahead and color this in blue. It's kind of bothering me. I'm using horde colors for Alliance. You got the first layer here, and then you've got the second layer where you can either come in from the ramp side, or if you come in from the first layer, there's a little ramp that you can go up here in this room, over here to the second floor, the second layer. Or if you come up through the tunnel, there's a way that you can break out to the right and get to the roof of the building. So when you're the flag carrier, if you want to turtle, if you want to shelter, generally you'll want to run to where, say, the roof is. So you'll want to go up your tunnel, and we'll explain this a little bit more later with the flag capture segment. You're going to run over here, and you're going to run over to here. Just because it's going to take the enemy so long to try and get to your position from their graveyard or from the team fight. And then on top of that too, they have to push through everybody on your team to come and try and get you. So that's a very good position. Another really good position is if they have people that love to storm the tunnel, and you are, say, right here. You could drop down to the second floor right here, or you could wrap around and then come up the ramp to this second floor and basically repeat that way. Hide over in this area, making it a bigger commitment for them to come and try to get you. A lot of people, they actually won't come up the ramp and then drop down to kill you if you're on this second layer. Instead, what they'll do is they'll come all the way up the tunnel, run all the way through the flag room, run all the way through here, run all the way up the ramp, and then by that time, when you see them committing to that, you can just drop down, go back to the third layer. And so you have a lot of options, customization, however you want to run it from there with your own team. Let's talk about the offense and defensive teams I was mentioning earlier. So as the offense and defensive team, the defensive team, you're probably going to want to be playing right in front of your team's tunnel so that your flag carrier can get through the tunnel. And this tunnel is on a ramp as well. So once your flag carrier reaches a certain point on the tunnel, because they are going upwards on the Z-axis, it will break line of sight for ranged attacks. And so that's going to be really powerful for stopping people from getting to your own flag carrier. So if you're like a Death Knight or a Warlock or a Mage or something, you can position yourself right up here. I mean, like, this is a perfect place too for mages to get a Ring of Frost. I'm totally aware that this text is going away, but we'll get back to the presentation. So like you could set up like a Ring of Frost, or you could set up like, you could position yourself here and fear everybody. You could set up a tar trap here if you're a hunter. There's a lot of zone control that you can specifically put at this area to choke the enemy out from getting to your team. And then this whole tunnel as well is very tight, very enclosed quarters, very good for playing defense in. And then also too, you can like death grip enemy healers out of line of sight. Like if you were to stand over off to the side, like right here. There's just so many options you have as defensive DPS by playing directly at the front of your tunnel or either like in your tunnel, allowing your flag carrier to be in front of you. So if you're on the offensive team and you're trying to get the enemy flag carrier, you first want to know where the enemy flag carrier actually is. And you can do this by clicking on their little profile icon in big debuffs. And this will tell you if the enemy flag carrier is either on the roof or on the second floor. From there, you want to push in with your other DPS. You really don't want to go in solo unless you're one of those high threat solo targets like an assassination rogue, like a boomkin, like a marksman hunter. But for the most part, you want to push with your team as a unit. You want to group up, and then you're either going to go through the tunnel. You're going to try and push through the enemy's defensive team, crowd controlling them in the process. You really don't want to outright kill them because at that point you're just wasting your time. Or you're going to go up the ramp through the base into the flag carrier. You are trying to find the path of least resistance to the enemy flag carrier, so whichever direction that is that suits you best. You're going to be moving through as a team. You're going to be making sure the whole team is moving together, using your own utility on your teammates to help get them out of crowd control, help lock down the enemy healers, and outright kill the flag carrier, get a quick return. A quick tip if you're listening to the map review segment and you haven't skipped through the video is that you can actually find the interact with object, or I believe it's like the return flag. It's not return flag, it's like an interact with object to your mouse wheel scroll up or down. And so if you're spamming the mouse wheel scroll up and down, up and down, up and down over the flag, you can instantly return it and deny anybody else on the enemy team from picking up the flag. Something else I forgot to mention too is that there are speed boost buffs in the tunnel over here off to the left, depending on which direction you're going. It's probably going to be a little bit down here for Horde. And so if you happen to grab the flag, it is probably a good idea to go through the tunnel if the speed boost buff is available. Else you can really just kind of pick your poison, again, whichever is the path of least resistance to get to the flag. But there's really not a whole lot going on this map. I mean, it's very straightforward. There's a lot of open space in this middle here. It's very easy to get caught up in these middle fights, but a lot of them will happen to be bait, and we'll talk about that in a little bit when I go over some general tips. And the main thing, above all else, is objectives and killing the enemy flag carrier if you have an opportunity to, slowing them from whatever direction they're coming to, like whether it be through here, through here, through here. Paying attention to where the enemy flag carrier is, paying attention where your own flag carrier is so you can provide support and help, and doing your part to help the team secure a victory. So with that, we'll go ahead and end the map review there. We'll jump right into the general tips, and then we'll come back to here when we talk about carrying the flag. All right, so getting into the general tips for capture the flag maps, the first is going to be that crowd control matters a lot more than damage. Realistically speaking, the main damage that matters is the damage on the enemy flag carrier, because you can utilize crowd control to split up and lock down the enemy team to prevent the enemy flag carrier from receiving help. And this makes killing them much more easy to do. I feel like crowd control still is not utilized enough in Battleground Blitz, but in Rated Battlegrounds, it was always hammered in that you want to be crowd controlling the enemy healers, you want to be crowd controlling people off of the flag carrier so that you can get the kill and get the quick return. The second tip I got for y'all is that the first point does not matter at all. So many teams give up whenever they lose the first point on capture the flag. But the way that the scoring system works is that if a team were to tie up the game, either bring it to 1-1 or 2-2, and the game timer runs out, the team that got the point to get the tie is declared the victor. So if the Horde goes up 1-0 on the Alliance, and then the Alliance were to bring it back 1-1, if the timer runs out while the game is 1-1, the Alliance will win that game. Realistically, you're not super scared unless for some reason the enemy team happens to go up 2-0 against you, and then at that point that's when things get a little bit more tricky and it gets more difficult to bring it back. The third point I got for y'all is that team fights are a trap. Any team fight past the first one is a trap. You probably should not be participating in it. You should either be on your way to the enemy flag carrier, or you should be on your way to help your own flag carrier out and peel for your flag carrier. And it seems like I put this in the notes too. If your flag has been picked up, killing the enemy flag carrier takes priority above all else. You should immediately turn around, click where they are on the map, and make your way over. Try and isolate him from getting to his team. And if both flags have been picked up, do not fight in the middle. Do not. There's no purpose to fight in the middle. What are you doing? And then the fourth tip I've got for y'all is that Battleground enemies will tell you who the enemy flag carrier is. I forgot to mention this in my add-ons video, but on the frame within Battleground enemies, there will be an Alliance or a Horde flag icon on it, and then when you click on that frame, it'll target them, so you'll immediately know where they're at on the map, if they're on the roof, if they're on the second floor, if they're on the first floor, and so you can use that to your advantage. Let's talk about carrying the flag when you are in this capture the flag map, because not every game is going to have a tank, so sometimes you may have to be the person that carries the flag. Generally, whenever there's not a tank, the flag carrier should default to either a monk, a druid, or a demon hunter, since those are the three most mobile classes in the game. But the first thing I want to go over is that your route matters a lot. We're going to go back to the map shortly here, and I'll talk to you about possible route options and when you should pick which route. But you want to also ensure that you're staying in range of your healers. And then here's a big thing, is that you want to use your trinket on long physical stuns. Some stuns in the game, like Hammer of Justice, are magic, and you'll tell because they have like a blue border around it, but physical stuns are the stuns that have a red border. Now, you may be thinking, it's like, okay, well, if I have the empowered carrier buff, like, why would I want to trinket a stun? I already get damage reduction on that stun, and you don't want to trinket when you're at low stacks. I'm more so talking like when you're in the base and you have 12 stacks and the rogue kidney shots you. The second you get stunned in that scenario is when you would want to press your trinket, because you can do the least amount of actions while you're in a stun compared to any other type of crowd control, such as like a root, such as an incapacitate, such as a fear like blind, or a fear from a warlock or a priest. Damage will break that crowd control and put you on the diminishing returns so that you have more action time to press your abilities, to keep yourself alive, to run around. And so, for the reason that every other form of crowd control can get broken on damage, this is why stuns are the most powerful crowd control in the game, is because nothing breaks it. And last but not least is that you're going to want to create distance between yourself and the enemies. I should have put another clause in there, like without line of sighting your healers, but I think that gets the general memo of what your objectives are when you are carrying the flag. So let's go ahead and jump back over to the map and I'll talk about some routes. All right, so let's talk briefly about routes and pathing when you do find yourself in a scenario where you are carrying the flag. I do believe that this is important, and depending on what the enemy team is doing and what your team is doing can help dictate which is the safest and best route for you. So let's get started. We're going to assume that you are the Alliance in this scenario, that you're going to the Warsong Lumber Mill, you're going to pick up the flag from the Horde. You successfully grab the flag, and then you have a choice. So you can either go out this right door through the enemy graveyard, and this gives you by far the shortest, straightest path to your tunnel. You go either through the enemy tunnel and straight to your tunnel, which seems like the most direct path, or you could go out this right door, down the ramp towards your own graveyard and to your tunnel. I mean, you also could run to your ramp in some certain niche situations, but ideally you're trying to make it from the enemy base to your tunnel, just because the tunnel happens to give you the most cover, especially against ranged attacks, and it gives you a nice closed condensed space where not a lot of people can get line of sight on you at the same time. So really, you really don't want to be coming up the ramp if you can avoid it. But when would you choose to go to each of these three? So the graveyard is by far going to be the most dangerous path. Let's go ahead and erase these arrows. I'll go back over them. The graveyard is going to be the most dangerous path because you have the highest chance of intercepting the enemy team on your way back. The enemy team could either be just respawning and they'll have fresh resources and health and everything they need to kill you and stop you, or crowd control you to prevent your own team from linking up with you, and that's just bad news. But if you're confident in your own team's ability to win the team fight and to be able to back you up and support you, or if you happen to be duo queuing with like a preservation evoker or a discipline priest, someone like that who can give you that extra boost of movement speed, that utility that you need, that life grip, that rescue, going through the graveyard could be a really nice option, especially with empowered carrier 2. You can very quickly get back to your base. But I'm just trying to let you know in advance, it is the more riskier strategy of the three. You can also come down the tunnel right here. If there is a speed boost buff available, it'll be somewhere off here to the left. I know it's hard to see because the map doesn't show you everything within the tunnel from a top-down view, but you could grab the speed boost as well. This does stack with the empowered carrier speed boost, and you can go super fast directly through. In my opinion, this is one of the safer options, or at least this is the option that I do when I flag carry as Restoration Shaman. Or what you could do is you could come out, this will be the safest option of the three. You could come out the enemy's top here, because in order for them to leave the graveyard, they have to respawn and go all the way up the tunnel, then come all the way to the flag room, then come all the way around to chase you. Or they have to go all the way in front over here, exposing themselves to everybody on your team to try and come up and intercept you. So going the ramp is going to be the safest option, but the issue is with going ramp is that it is by far the longest option of the three when it comes to travel time. And travel time is something that you should consider, because the focused assault debuff starts 30 seconds after yourself and the enemy are holding the flag at the same time, when both flags are captured from the bases and are being held. So you really do want to get back to your base as quick as possible before those stacks start ramping up. You really don't want to be lollygagging, so that's why the second you pick up a flag, you should be making a decision on where you want to go. There's going to be other factors too, like what you could do is you could click through everybody's frames on Battleground enemies and know, like, okay, well, if I see that the Horde is fighting somewhere over here, then I'm probably going to want to go ramp because I will have a longer distance that I'm not intercepting them. They have to go a longer way out of the way to come and get me, as opposed to just running directly to them. Or, for instance, if they're doing like a full team escort and they're all the way back here, there's like 6 of them in your base right here, you could just run through the graveyard real quick because who's going to stop you? So with pathing, again, you really don't have a lot of options. You really only have 3 main options right here. But picking the best path for you is largely going to come down to how long is it going to take, how much time do you actually have to get back to your base, and how much risk do you want to put yourself in. You can kind of like mix and match. Like I know sometimes when I carry, I'll come out here, I'll act like I'm going graveyard, and then I don't know if you can see it, but there's this really little slit of land that you can actually fit your character on. You can jump onto the tent right here and then head out as though you went through the tunnel. There's paths that you could take like that as well. You want to find the shortest distance between yourself and your allies who are going to be supporting you, peeling for you, healing you, etc., and creating the most distance between yourself and the whole enemy team that's going to come and try and kill you. With that being said, that'll do it for the Warsong Gulch guide today. I surprisingly don't have a game to show as an example because I've played like 2 Warsong Gulch games in the past 9 days. I've gotten really unlucky with it, but Silver Shard Mines, I've got that. I get Silver Shard Mines all day, every day, but Warsong Gulch, I really don't play a whole lot, but I will be back here tomorrow for the Twin Peaks map breakdown. We're just going to be doing a short map breakdown and a short how to carry the flag guide on that. But in combination with the tips you've learned here, I hope that you found this guide useful to provide you with the information you need to enhance your decision making and help you overall win more games on these capture the flag maps. If you learned something today, or if you did enjoy this type of content, it would mean a lot to me if you could support my channel by either subscribing or liking the video or showing your friends. And until next time, this is Moon, signing out.